Welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. As you can tell, we're in a different facility here today. I wanted to say thank you to the Baylor Scott White Heart Hospital here in Plano, Texas, for hosting us in the incredible facility. We've got a really provocative and thoughtful conversation on deck for you guys here today. We're going to be talking about AI applications in cardiology specifically. We've got three esteemed guests that are joining me. Each of them comes from a different background and has a really unique perspective on the business, but the one thing that ties them all together is they all have a ton of experience in AI specific to cardiology. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them, let them introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their background related to the topic, and then we'll jump in. Tony, you want to lead us off?
Sure. I'm Tony Doss. This is actually my home hospital, the Baylor Scott White Heart Hospital, where I serve as System Director for Business Development and Innovation. I also lead digital health and vascular interventions. So my role today is to be the physician at the table to kind of tell the group a little bit about how we use AI and digital tools in our everyday practices. Thanks, Mike.
Amir.
Yeah, I'm Amir Mahmood. I'm the CEO of Cardiology, which has a digital health AI platform for reduction or mitigating risk stratifying CAD at point of care. My background is medtech for over 25 years, specific to the cardiovascular space. So I'm here to represent a little bit more on the industry side from an executive standpoint.
Okay.
Ken Nelson, live here in Dallas, Texas. Currently co-founder and partner in the MedTech Advantage Fund. MedTech Advantage Fund will be investing exclusively in MedTech Innovator alumni companies. MedTech Innovator is the largest medical device, digital health, and diagnostic startup accelerator in the world. Started out in cardiac with Guidant and then Boston Scientific in cardiac rhythm management. On the implantable side, first half of my career, and then the back half of my career, built the teams that commercialized and launched the products, first for iRhythm, then for biotelemetry. iRhythm went public, biotelemetry got acquired by Philips, and then lastly with Barty Diagnostics, which got acquired by Hillrom. More recently have joined the innovation advisory boards of both the Heart Rhythm Society and the American Heart Association, and I'm on the boards or advisory boards of 9 cardiac and neuro startups, including Cardiology, where Amir is the CEO.
We had to get you to come in because we couldn't find anybody with any credentials. So let's start this off by addressing the big question. What is the hope or the promise of AI in cardiology? Dr. Doss, I'll let you lead us off. In your clinical experience to date, what's the number one technology you've seen that's really had an impact on patient care? And along those lines, is it really improving diagnosis, or is it just creating complexity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I think the thing about digital health and AI is to take tasks that are currently have variability and to reduce the variability in those tasks, and also for increasing precision diagnosis. So every day, one of the things that we're using that has an AI tool associated with it is CT angiography that has FFR CT. So HeartFlow, Clearly, Elucid, these are companies that have developed algorithms that now can determine the severity of stenosis, not only from an anatomic standpoint, but a physiologic standpoint with simply a CT scan. That's something we use every day. Probably something else that we will be using and are starting to use a little bit is these EKG-derived diagnoses. The algorithms that are on EKGs now appear to just look at the EKG and interpret it, but there's been a lot of work done at many centers, including Columbia specifically, where they've looked at thousands and hundreds and thousands of EKGs and identified other cardiovascular diseases other than just the electrical abnormalities. You can identify, for instance, structural heart disease, aortic valve disease, things that you would not think are interpretable from the EKG. So those are where we're going to have tools that we use every day that are going to keep on increasing our ability to make better, more specific diagnosis. Those are two good examples for right now.
Yeah, that's great. And along those lines, Amir, your company, Cardiology, is pioneering AI in cardiology. What's the what's the most compelling problem you think that we should be trying to solve at present with these AI technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of capitalize on what Dr. Doss just mentioned. I mean, the facts are facts. What I think the most compelling offering that AI brings to the table is the ability to accurately detect early disease states and risk stratify those patients early at the onset, because so many of these low to moderate chest pain, or not it's chest pain, that's a Carix, but low to moderate patients are not being diagnosed until it's too late, once they're too far along in the process. And at Carix, very similar to what you mentioned about HeartFlow and Clearly and Lucid, is they are in the CT space with FFR. We are early in the diagnosis phase. So we're trying to mitigate the process early and intervene early so you can have a little bit better outcome, or more pertinently, a better outcome in early detection. And I think that's kind of what is going to revolutionize healthcare, is the early onset and detection, so that you can risk stratify the patients and get them the therapies they need in a much more quicker fashion.
Yeah, and we're seeing technologies that are addressing different disease states all along the spectrum that are trying to get in early in on that patient's pathology. Ken, you sit in a really interesting seat because you're an investor. You've been an operator multiple times over. Putting your investor hat on here, you've invested in a number of these companies, and billions have been dumped into this space, but the returns have been sparse. Do you think we'll turn the corner there, and if so, what could be the catalyst?
Yeah, I think there's two problems or challenges that I think, two big ones that need to be addressed and fixed, and I think it's all of us collaborating across the ecosystem to help figure out the solutions. One is the data piece. I feel like you've got all this data coming from these different implantable and wearable devices, and a lot of times it goes to, say, for example, the implanter of the device, whereas they may not want to be, or may not be, the person managing their heart failure. It may be an electrophysiologist to put the device in. So they need to figure out a good way to map the right actionable data to the right physician on that patient's caregiver, versus dumping all of the data to maybe the person who was implanting the device. So that's one piece, and you really only want to be sending the physician or caregiver the actionable data, and then they can look at everything when they want to, but they don't want to get waken up in the middle of the night for a normal run of AFib, for example.
Right.
So that's one piece where AI, I think, is going to really help. And the other side of it is just getting more of a confidence level out there across the general public about AI and the capabilities. And one of the areas, I think we were just talking about this the other day, that I tell people who don't believe in AI or don't feel like we're there yet, go to San Francisco and look around for the Waymo cars, the driverless cars. They're now everywhere.
Great example.
And I would advise you or recommend, go for a short ride in one. Just stay in the city, go from a hotel to another hotel or something, and just to get a feel, and you'll be absolutely amazed. Now, are they 100% there yet? And can they go on the highway? I'm not sure they're there yet, but to see them everywhere and in widespread use, and actually go in one myself, it really opens your eyes. And so anybody who doesn't feel like AI is going to make an impact or isn't making an impact right now, I'd say go check out that. It's a great way to really feel more comfortable about it.
Yeah, that's a great lead into a question we're going to get to in a little bit. But on Instagram today or LinkedIn, I saw a video of a Waymo car. Yeah. And there was a kid on roller skates right in front of it. The kid falls into the street, and the car kind of side swiped around the kid. And you think to yourself, would I have been able to do that, right? So can we trust that AI? Perhaps we can, perhaps we can't. I would tend to believe that as the AI advances, it's probably going to get better than humans. But we'll get to that.
The other thing I'll say is, if you look at what's happened with generative AI, especially in the last 24 to 36 months versus the 10 years prior, we are moving at such an accelerated pace right now that things are really coming to fruition right now. And I think you'll see the adoption of these things really start to speed up as well.
And you've led perfectly into the next question. So we've talked about the hope. Let's talk about the problems. I think we could all agree that the adoption has been not what we had all hoped or anticipated, at least at this point in time. Amir, I'd like to go to you first. From an industry perspective, what do you think is the one or two biggest reasons that we haven't seen the adoption yet?
Right. So the two I would really categorize are achieving clinical evidence, factual clinical evidence, robust data, safe and effective, but also helpful. And the second is regulatory approval, right? And that is a struggle in its own. But you have to be able to provide significant data for the physicians to have that belief and that buy-in. You have to make sure that it's safe for patients, right? So you're going to have the physician and the patient buy-in to adopt new technologies that are different, but becoming much more advanced just in the last 24 months. And then when you look at it from that perspective, I think that in itself is quite monumental as a task, and getting through that. And the second, regulatory, which is even more monumental task, is proving the safety and efficacy and ensuring that it can be implemented, and more pertinently implemented into a workflow, right? So you have to have that ability to where it's adding value to that physician and not creating an obstacle or a barrier of entry. And I think if you have both of those combined, you can see some development and success. But those would be the two largest that we also face. I mean, it is a very difficult environment as you kind of progress forward. And you have to have that data, because when you have AI involved, just like you're talking about Waymo and people adopting to it, that is something that is really critical. So they need to see that robust data that is factual, real-world evidence, and that it's safe to really move forward and have that adoption from a physician, because you're changing behaviors.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes really difficult.
Yeah, Ken, you've invested in a number of these countless of these AI-driven technologies in cardiology. Why do you think we're not seeing the adoption that we had hoped?
Yeah, so I think in addition to what Amir just mentioned, we really have to join forces with, I think, the industry groups, AHA, HRS, ACC, and others to fight and get better, more appropriate reimbursement for the tools that are out there. I mean, one example is with the RPM codes, remote physiologic parameter monitoring. It's one code, one reimbursement, regardless of the number of vital signs that are
Correct.
being monitored. So you could be monitoring one for one disease state, or you might be monitoring a dozen for multiple chronic conditions, but the physician's only getting reimbursed one time. And there's multiple devices for multiple different companies. It just doesn't make sense. And if you're also tracking with a patient that has multiple chronic conditions, there just needs to be more appropriate reimbursement. I think when that starts to happen, and we really need to put pressure on CMS and the commercial payers to do that, you'll start to see more adoption from the physicians, and then obviously more patients will be using the technology.
Along those lines, do you see the TAP program from CMS being beneficial? I know that there's a limited number of companies that can be entered into that program, but do you think that that's a step in the right direction?
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up. So somebody told me the statistic this weekend. I think 80% of the companies that are in the TAP program are MedTech Innovator alumni companies. I just heard that. I think Omnibot told me that at ACC this weekend. And if you talk to some of those companies, and I'm pretty close to several of them, and any company that I'm involved with or on the board of, I'm highly suggesting that they try to get breakthrough device designation, which you have to get into the TAP program. And talking to people that run the TAP program, they describe it as a concierge service to help the startup have an accelerated process to get through the FDA. And it's just really an unbelievable program. So I'm a huge advocate of it and recommend any. And they've now opened it up. It was cardiac first, then they opened it to neuro, and now I think it's any.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it is. Any startup that's in the device world can try to get into the program.
Yeah.
So yeah, huge advocate, and I've heard it's working really well.
Yeah, that's great. Tony, as a clinician, why do you think many physicians, dare I say most, have been so reluctant to fully integrate this into their clinical workflows?
Well, first of all, I think it's difficult to integrate things that are not well established in our EHR. So we have fragmented EHR, platforms that it makes it very difficult to put new technology in there. You can have a back-end API that might be useful for say, for instance, one platform, a second one for another, and ultimately it's the gatekeeper, which is the EHR, Epic at most big shops, and the place that most of these projects get stopped is not at the clinical level. It's not even at the administrative level. It's at the IT level, and I think that that's probably one of the biggest barriers, is getting it into the workflow requires that it actually be on your screen in a meaningful way. The second one is probably kind of connected to the amount of data. Kind of data fatigue is part of the concern that, wait a second, if we're going to get this much information, what am I going to do with it? But the flip side of that is also a concern for physicians, which is the liability piece. So when we order a test or we get a piece of information, we're liable for that information getting back to either the caregivers that are also collaborating with you or the patient or both. And I think those two things end up really being barriers to adoption to, one, new technique or technology that isn't clear in the EHR, and also isn't clear about who's liable for something that you're not exactly in control of getting the information to or from. So those things will continue to be an issue until, like Amir said, trust is developed. And so when right now algorithms fall into this category of black box. So there's data that is being procured from whether it's a wearable or an implantable, et cetera, and then it goes through a pattern recognition process or a data adjudication process, and then it comes out as something else. And until we trust what's going on in the black box and know that we're not going to be liable for something that's incredibly accurate or inaccurate, I think it's going to be hard for people to adopt to. And, clinicians are generally kind of, verify, but trust is something that takes us time to get to, because we're sort of based on data and research and technology. Sometimes of these types takes a little time to get into our hands. So there'll be early adopters, and then there'll be laggards, just like every other medical technology. If you look at that sort of adoption algorithm, it's frequently like that. There'll be some folks that are very interested in it early, like some of the folks at this table, and then there'll be folks that'll wait until it's overproven.
Yeah, Moore's adoption curve, I think, is what you're referencing there, and it's pretty standard across any new technology that comes out. And I want to come back to that point here in a second. We've talked about the hope of AI. We've talked about the current state. I'd like to talk. Let's forward look a little bit here. Ken, if you had a 10-year fund that you were investing in these types of AI technologies right now, where would you be placing your bets?
So one of the areas that I feel over the next several years or so you'll see a period of explosive growth comes in the multi-parameter vital signs monitoring patches. So right now you have a lot of single parameter ones, like maybe they may do real-time ECG, but now they're adding in things like respiration rate and pulse oximetry and other vitals into one device, and applying AI on top of those devices. I think you're going to see an explosive growth there. I also think you're going to see chronic conditions being managed in part by those types of devices. So I think that will be one area. The other area, you'll see devices like Cardiocare and their watch that can not only detect arrhythmias but also treat them through a wearable non-invasively. So you start to see more of that, and all of those will be powered by AI. You'll see things like Heartbeam's card that, it's a credit card-sized device anyone could have in their wallet, and put it on the chest, and you get a synthesized 12 lead. So not only can you do arrhythmias, but it will have heart attack detection right in the patient's pocket. And then the third thing, I think you'll start to see that the patient's cell phone or smartphone in their pocket become, in a sense, a primary care physician, because you now have arrhythmia detection from there, your blood pressure. You combine it with someone's smartwatch or the patches that they're wearing. But there's also lots of patients that across the world can't afford an Apple Watch. And so I think the phone that's in their pocket becomes a global tool. So you see companies like Happy Tech where all you need is the phone in your pocket, where you can put your finger on the smartphone camera, and in that particular case, there's arrhythmia detection of AFib. Eventually, with AI, they'll be able to look at other arrhythmias also. But there's companies out there that are developing blood pressure from the smartphone and all kinds of other sensors just from the smartphone alone. No other pieces of hardware. Are they perfect right now? No. But I think with the inclusion of AI, these are going to get more and more and more accurate, and you'll start to see that cell phone, smartphone, become almost like a primary care physician in many ways. Not perfect, but I think it'll start to get utilized that way. And honestly, I'd love to hear Tony and Amir's take on that, because I'm sure they have interesting perspectives as well.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see too these technologies being developed in silos. Who's going to come in and tie all that together, right? And feed that back to the physician, so that it can be not just, again, data, but just
Honestly,
actionable insights.
It's what I was doing. It's what I've been doing at these conferences, is going and meeting some of these companies and saying, I know you're focused on blood pressure or whatever it is. Why don't you go talk to this company that's focused on arrhythmia detection from the smartphone? If you combine blood pressure and arrhythmia detection, that becomes an even more powerful tool. Doing it on your own is great, but man, it's even more powerful together. So I'm trying to start to make those relationships happen now, and I think getting people who are willing to invest in that and maybe bring some of these companies together, I think there'll be some real winners there.
Yeah. Tony, how do you envision 5 to 10 years from now the clinical practice looking different than it does today as a result of some of these technologies Ken's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you described it is what I would call augmented cardiology.
Yeah.
In other words, you're at the patient's bedside, and there's a litany of information that's coming at you that's database from maybe the wearable. At the same time, they might have some outside records that you can feed through a natural language processor and get a quick summary of what's going on that happened in their last 10 years of care, or even in their last hospitalization, instead of trying to flip through 50 pages of documents that really don't really mean anything. And that augmented cardiology then would also help taking that personalized patient record and then helping you with, hey, these are the guidelines for this type of patient. You might want to think about adding this medication or doing this test. And it's sort of a guardrail that sort of keeps us honest about what's happening with the patient, and all the way up to date with what's happening with technology and guidelines at the same time. So I see it kind of like an integrated co-pilot. It's not necessarily managing the patient, but it's there to say, hey, did you think about this, that, or the other? You added this medicine, there's a reaction with this other one. Stuff that we know, but also stuff that's good to be reminded of. And people have a different sense of how they'll want to adopt that. To me, it's like all the help I can get is great, because I think the best thing we can do is be as up to date as possible with our patients. And sometimes there's new data, new research information that's worth bringing to the table that you may not have thought of in this particular situation. And we're already starting to see that in some really rare diseases, especially pediatrics and others, where there's genetic diseases that are in such low numbers that when those patients are seen in a clinic that is using augmented reality along with their general EHR, especially in some of the children's hospitals, they're picking up diseases that are 1 in 100,000 type of, because of the way that the people are presenting. So I think for cardiology, there's such an enormous amount of data that each patient produces, and that if you take all the world's EKGs, all the world's echoes and everything, and you start to put that towards the learnings for your particular patient, you're going to be a much better clinician. I mean, I would always look at that help as something that's making me a better doctor, as opposed to taking over my, people worry about, is it going to, take my place? I'm not worried about AI taking my place. I'm more enthusiastic about AI helping me augment my ability to have a place where I can then do the things that AI has a harder time doing, which is sitting at a bedside or having empathy for a patient, or understanding the nuance of a clinical situation along with a family situation that sometimes carries a lot of personal time, and that you don't have to waste that kind of time doing what I would call mundane tasks, like interpreting testing that could be done more by another format.
Yeah, you hear a lot of talk about practicing at the top of your license, being able to do the things that doctors should be doing on a daily basis, practicing with empathy, not researching, some rare disease that could take you hours upon hours of work to research. So
and I can't imagine how difficult it is for you as a clinician. Not only do you have to manage your patients, but trying to keep track and on top of the latest guidelines, the latest clinical studies. It's got to be really difficult, and we're all humans. So to make a mistake or to miss something, it's going to happen. It probably happens, on a regular basis to different degrees. To have an assistant, an AI virtual assistant, to say, hey, this new indication came out, or did you see this new study on this particular issue, or did you know there's a new FDA-cleared device that might be able to help this patient? I don't know why a physician wouldn't want that, because you don't have to agree with what they say, but it'd be nice to have that virtual AI assistant, so to speak,
100%.
to kind of bring up the recommendation.
100%.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Amir, from an industry perspective, are you seeing anything out there from a reimbursement, regulation, anything that on the horizon that could be an unlock for for moving the movement forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's the most significant unlock, right? Is the adoption from a payer and a regulatory standpoint. And I think that what we're seeing is AI everywhere, not just healthcare. I mean, it's everywhere. It's at the front page of every business vertical out there. And when you look at it from our perspective, I think you're seeing that there's becoming a much more streamlined adoption to the capabilities of AI and what AI can accomplish, like we're talking about today. Streamlined pathways in the regulatory environment. You've now got AI or digital health categories within the FDA specific to the United States. And then on the reimbursement front, I think you're seeing the adoption from payers because what they're seeing is a lot of these data points are helping physicians, either addressing it early, which is reducing unnecessary testing or unnecessary procedures. But most pertinently, what it's doing is it's providing the physician or the healthcare provider additional data points, like we're talking about, that maybe they don't have the time to go look at, and boom, there it is right in front of them in a quick capacity, and essentially extending lives and saving lives. I mean, I think that's what's coming, and I think reimbursement and payers are starting to see that, so they see the value proposition in the AI integration, because they're managing the patient from a cost standpoint for their healthcare, and if they can reduce their spend and enhance lives and improve outcomes, I think that kind of adoption process will assist us, and if that's unlocked, I think the sky's the limit for a number of these opportunities.
Yeah. Let's address the elephant in the middle of the room, which is obviously the data. Tony, how comfortable are you with these companies refining their algorithms using the patient's data, and then do you think the patient should be compensated for that?
Well, there's a leap there, right? So I think there's the data and then there's the compensation piece. So let's take each of them separately. I think that there should be transparency for what you're going to do with people's data. Obviously, if a company is to benefit from reams of data, then the patient should at least benefit from the technology, if not be compensated. But certainly they should know that it's been de-identified, that they are involved with the process, because it is their data. I had an idea once upon a time, and I'll share it with you guys now, which was the concept of using a blockchain for the data with every stakeholder actually benefiting from the blockchain. So imagine this, that each company that we've described has their own algorithm and information, but they only can produce so much data. But if you could imagine if they were part of providing data into a verifiable ledger where you knew the data was accurate, you knew it was de-identified, and then other companies like you were trying to put together, the blood pressure company and the arrhythmia company could both go in and then also extract data based on an NFT. So they would get an ability to sort of extract and to use. So you can imagine now the ecosystem is very useful. Now there's billions of data points, and then think about the other stakeholders that would benefit from that. The payers, the other providers. I mean, there'd be a lot of reasons for that to work. So to me, that's ultimately how you could make an ecosystem where you put in a certain amount of information, but you can also extract even more information, and it's all done on a verifiable ledger. So that's where blockchain could really be useful. And there's been very few companies that have adopted that concept, but I think that we're headed in that direction, because if you don't consolidate this stuff in a meaningful way, but you also can benefit from other people's learnings, then we're probably just going to go in little silos like we're doing now. Until that can be, shared, I think there's going to be a little bit of a difficulty in full adoption and full workflow. So it's just an idea.
Yeah, and that would definitely help things move forward much quicker. It would be interesting too if on the blockchain, the companies, because as I understand blockchain, you can set different parameters, so they could set it up so that the companies could go in and look at the data first and see, is this data we see valuable before buying that data, which would give a lot of optionality to the companies in terms of knowing what they're getting for their money. Amir, can companies balance innovation and privacy? And said another way, is there an opportunity for an ethical use of AI and data in cardiology?
Yeah, that's a difficult task, right? Most specifically in healthcare, balancing innovation and privacy. But the good news is we have a lot of regulations, including HIPAA, that really categorize medtech and exactly how it can be transmitted. I think it's all about transparency. I think that the patient and the physician need to understand how the data is being used and making sure that it's done in an ethical way. And sometimes, including at Carix, what we do is we make sure that there is no actual HIPAA data implemented into our workflow when we're providing a diagnostic. So there's many ways to do that, and I think that if you keep things clinical and transparent and clinical, and provide the data and ensure that the physician and the patient understand how that data is going to be used and that it is protected in the cybersecurity world, that's what's going to be critical for success in that factor. And it also adheres to the adoption, right? So there's many people who are fearful of AI and fearful of data, patient data, or even any source of data, credit card information, because there's tons of hacks and leaks. So we really got to categorize the safety of the device, the encryption of the device, and ensuring that we're transparent across the board in how that data is going to be used.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think there's a lot of people out there right now that did 23andMe a long time ago.
That's a scary thing.
And didn't really fully understand where that could end up, whose hands that could end up in at some point if the company goes belly up. Is it BlackRock? Who's going to buy that? And what's going to be the use of that data moving forward? So it's a really interesting point. I'm going to come back to the money guy here. The power of data, is that being undervalued or is it being overvalued when we look at the valuations of these AI companies?
So I'm going to approach that in a couple of different ways. I think if you look at the big medical device companies right now today, I think if the ones who don't embrace AI and digital health and transition from core med device players to also being digital health AI players, or making their existing devices AI enabled, and take too long to do it, risk becoming Kodak and becoming
correct.
I think so. From their terms of their valuations, I think they're sitting on tremendous amounts of data that's being underutilized, which will eventually become really important and really help train their own AI algorithms, and potentially they'll be able to monetize it to other companies to use their data for emerging startups. So I think right now it's definitely undervalued. And then for the startups, same thing. I mean, as you start to see this emergence and greater adoption of AI and digital health, these data repositories, and you'll start to see them being monetized by, so think about the big academic institutions. Mayo Clinic, Mount Sinai are two really good examples, because they have huge data sets of millions of patients of, say, ECGs. And they're now starting to monetize that. Now, they're not companies, but they're institutions who are monetizing the data. I think companies are going to start to do the same thing, but there haven't been tons yet who have figured out how to monetize that data. And as that starts to change, I think you'll see that the valuations start to go up.
Yeah, it's really insightful that you break that out, the big companies versus the startup companies. And as we start looking into like smart implants, right? We've got that in with the Canary Medical Persona IQ knee implant. They're working on a spinal implant. I know that they've got technology for the neurovasculature, and so as the technology gets smaller and smaller, you start to wonder if the value of that data is going to be more valuable than just the revenue streams that are going to be realized from the sale of those technologies. Could we get to a point where the companies essentially are giving the devices away or near giving them away just to have access? It's a conduit to the data.
Well, there's a company out of Sydney, Australia. I joined the board maybe 6 months ago called Echo IQ, pure AI play. And that's a good one to look at. I think valuation-wise, they're maybe 180 million. But that's one company that's a pure AI company. You're starting to see a nice valuation on it, and you're starting to see pure AI players getting acquired. Cardiology was one that got acquired by Philips a few years ago. I don't think that sale price is public, but I'll tell you it was hefty acquisition, really huge multiple.
We need more of those.
Yes.
We need more of those.
Yeah, it'd be great if they could get public on that one, because that one was a good one.
Yeah. So one of the big philosophical debates in AI is this whole concept of autonomous applications versus the co-pilot model. You talked about this a little bit. Amir, I'll let you step in here. Based on your experience, do you think AI ends up enhancing the cardiologist, augmenting the cardiologist, or ultimately, close your ears, Tony, or could it replace the R word? Could it end up replacing the cardiologist?
Let me make sure I'm out of Tony's reach.
Yeah.
No,
I can't be replaced.
no, you cannot. I mean, based on, in my opinion, I don't think that there's a chance that it would replace. I think there's too many variables that healthcare providers bring to the table, but I do believe AI will enhance it. I think AI has the capability, like we're all talking about, to take complex data and manifest it quickly within seconds, and that will only enhance a Tony's type situation or any healthcare provider, and that will enable him to make sure his patients are receiving the best, plan, as well as improving their outcomes over the term. So I think that AI, while it provides a significant value in analysis and doing it rapidly, but it lacks empathy. It lacks the ability to have clinical judgment. It's not going to have the ability to do the things that humans do. So do I think that it could replace other types of roles outside? Possibly, but not something that is patient-centric, patient care, or having that emotional connection with a patient-physician relationship. It's almost impossible to replace.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you the same question in a different way. Ken, do you think we'll ever see a point in time where we see an FDA approval for autonomous diagnosis and or treatment indication in cardiology?
So without the physician involved at all?
Yes.
So I think, especially when it comes to a specialist versus a primary care, it's going to be a long time before that's going to happen, partly because of the comfort level of the patient. And I think what will happen in the near term is already starting to happen is, like we talked about earlier, it's going to be an assistant that will make procedures go significantly faster, or decision making leading into the procedure. It will cut the prep time. But the analogy I'll give here is that we talked about autonomous cars earlier, the driverless cars, and I got in one, and I wanted to see how it was in San Francisco. The chances of me getting in a pilotless plane are at zero right now.
Yeah.
So it's more part of its comfort level. So are we going to see that in the near term? No. I'm not going to say never, but it's going to be a lot longer than people might think. But I don't think it's impossible. But part of it's going to be the patient and physician comfort level, but more so the patient. Are they willing to have a procedure without the doctor, or have that diagnosis without a physician looking at it? I think the comfort level now is they're still going to want a human and the human's perspective, just because of all the variables.
Yeah, and if you think about that, it's probably going to start with the low stakes pathologies first, right? And move up from there. Tony, I'm going to kick it over to you. Do you see yourself at any point in the future trusting an autonomous diagnosis or obviously intervention treatment.
Well, I would suggest we already trust some things
Yeah.
autonomously. So, for instance, we send out event monitors and Holter monitors. We get a reading back on those, and we trust that, and we just verify. We get, a CT scan, and it has a workflow analysis, a preliminary, and we trust that and verify it. So, automation is really already something that we're partly doing. I think that to make the full diagnosis and to make the full treatment plan kind of requires the other three things we talked about, which is the empathy and the art of taking care of the patient, et cetera. And then there's the liability piece that still exists too, right? So somebody's got to be liable. It's a little hard to have an algorithm be responsible for an outcome. Exactly. So I think that we trust automation. I already trust automation in the things that I think that it should be trusted for, which is helping me look at data, information, images. Those are the kind of things that you should definitely be using automation for, because it doesn't make any sense to spend hours and hours looking at something that's very simplistic. I say that even to my imaging techs, like, I can only see what you show me. So you can imagine that when I read a vascular study or read an echo or anything, if they haven't done a great job of imaging, then there are things that could be missed even in those situations, and that's a human-to-human interaction. Can you imagine if in the middle we had an automated platform that basically allowed me to focus on the things that were important in that imaging test or that diagnostic piece, and then I could decide through using this co-pilot system that, hey, that's an important piece of information, and now I'm much faster and better at a personalized diagnosis treatment plan and move on than I would be if I was not trusting in those things. So I'm an early adopter for these things, but I think it's partly because I know now what things are capable of being automated, and again, as the algorithms get better, we'll see that there's more things in that category. Right now there's just some, and they're mostly image-based.
Yeah, it's going to be incremental over time, and it'll be an evolution for sure. So I always like to say, with wisdom comes power. Let's talk about the lessons we have learned thus far, and how those could better inform the future technologies of tomorrow. Based on what you know, is there anything you specifically look for that makes a company investable or uninvestable for you in this space, forward-looking at technology?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors there. I think first and foremost, it starts with the people. I think, are those people running the company, are they coachable? Do they have the tenacity and the perseverance to get through the ups and downs of the roller coaster that comes with being a startup? And there's lots of them. There's a lot of tough times. Startups are just hard. So it starts first and foremost with the people. Close second to that is going to be, what does the technology do, and what kind of a problem are they solving, and is there a viable significant market for that? Have they thought through the reimbursement pathway? Have they thought through the regulatory pathway? I think going through accelerator programs like the one that I'm involved with, which I went through as a startup with Barty, and just got a tremendous amount of value in. I feel like those programs, like a MedTech Innovator, locally we have Health Wildcatters, Capital Factory, Blackstone Launchpad, there's a number of them here. It just makes the companies, their chances of success a lot greater. And so I like to see that. And then I think last is, are they thinking about the clinical evidence, and when they think about that, the protocols that they're designing, have they thought about not only getting FDA clearance with those studies, but have they thought about, does that study design, the number of patients, et cetera, will that also get them payer coverage from Medicare and commercial payers? If that stuff is already kind of baked in and they're already thinking about that stuff, I think they have a much greater chance of getting invested. Ones that say, oh, we'll worry about reimbursement later, it's just being naive, and probably their first startup, they haven't thought about that. But I can tell you, if they don't have a good plan for the reimbursement strategy, that will be an automatic out for a lot of these venture funds and corporate strategic investors.
Yeah, you mentioned startups are hard, and I've heard it said a number of times. The road's getting rough, and it's like, no, the road's not getting rough. That is the road in the startups.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
it
that
is.
is right.
You better be prepared for that. We deal with that every day, placing individuals and leaders in these companies, and especially when we're taking somebody that's spent a considerable amount of time in a big strategic.
Mm-hmm.
You really got to dig in deep and find out what's underneath the surface.
And obviously, if they've had exits before, that helps.
Sure.
But not everyone's
always.
had that, and there's always first-time founders that are going to be tremendously successful. So you got to weigh a lot of these different factors.
Yeah. Tony, what about you? Is there one or two technologies that aren't on the market today, but that are coming, that you're really excited about, that you think that it really could change the game from a patient care perspective?
I think there's a series of them. You have to kind of look at the 3 or 4 different places where AI could really help. I think one of the places is this whole concept of querying the EHR with natural language processing and other tools that can give you. There's 2 ways of getting information out of large databases. One is what they call supervised, which means that you're looking for something that you kind of have a sense of what it's going to turn out to be. Hey, I have a patient that has heart failure. When I see the weight go up, they're probably getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that I really want to see is really digging into all the pieces that are in the EHR, including the kind of non-uniform data pieces that are under PDFs and other places where natural language processing can help put them into a codifiable technique where you can now look at the entire patient's history all the way back and get insights to be more precise about how you treat them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think those things will be very advantageous, because then you can deploy technologies for in-between visits. And I call it untethered medicine, right? So if I'm taking care of you, I'll probably see you once every 6 months. But in between, if I had a way to know a little bit about you that was frictionless, that'd be super helpful to me, right? And I think that being incorporated into my EHR and put into, queryable format so I can actually look for it, find it later, it's going to make me be able to see you way more efficiently and with the right data, instead of something that is just going to waste your time. You're a busy guy. You'd probably rather do a 10-minute televisit with me having all the information in front of me than driving halfway across town to come see me in the office and me fumbling through data that doesn't really make any sense. So just the precision of technology pieces that help us do better with each individual patient,
Mm-hmm.
I think would be. And there are companies that are starting to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can't always take a page out of high tech, because we live in a regulated industry. But that is one thing I think we can take from high tech, is they're maniacal about the white glove frictionless process. And I think if we can kind of roll some of that into what's happening here in healthcare, from a patient perspective and a physician perspective, I think you're onto something there. Amir, what if you were starting a Carix today? What's the one piece of information you would really want to know before charting your path forward?
It's hard to quantify just the one, but kind of leading on what Ken was saying when he evaluates organizations for investments. I mean, if I was starting again today, first set aside you have to have the clinical validation, right? Your product has to deliver on all aspects of clinical and outcomes, but understanding the payer, the demographic, the regulatory pathway, and the reimbursement pathway. We're in an evolution. As we all know across the world in healthcare, this AI is really starting to transition and evolve, as we spoke of. Things are becoming more adoptable. I think I just read a post last night by Sam Altman that ChatGPT, when they launched, in the first week, they got a million followers or 1 million accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And then yesterday, in 1 hour, they added 1 million. So the adoption is coming, right? So understanding that, because we're in an evolution, understanding the pace of what the regulatory and reimbursement pathways would take,
Mm-hmm.
and having a fundamental understanding of that, that would be critical, because that would not only allow you to be more strategic in your raises, but more strategic in your timelines to market, but also that obviously eventually evolves into a profitability factor or an exit factor. So understanding those two, that would be real, or understanding the pace of those two and
Mm-hmm.
the timelines for those two. It would be really, really great, because when you look at AI and you look at all these advancements and these new technologies, a lot of them are first in class, like a Carix first in class. We don't have a predicate. So that's a much more difficult process from both standpoints. And
Yeah.
most specifically reimbursement,
Yeah.
right? So those are the things that those two things would be acutely easier. To
Yeah,
help
it makes
launch.
makes it much more easy to forecast, to budget,
Absolutely.
and allocate resources for sure. Guys, we could go on and on
Yeah.
about this forever. I really appreciate the thoughtful conversation. I think this is a good point to put a pin in the conversation at this point. I want to say thanks again to the Heart Hospital here at Baylor Scott White Plano for allowing us to use their amazing facilities, and thank you guys again for joining me, and maybe we can do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Thank
I
you for having
appreciate
us.
it.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Matt.
Thank you.
I'm Mike Moore. This is the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Until next time, be well.